everyone. This is Paul Casey with the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series, where we talk about Kenpo, related subjects to Kenpo, sometimes techniques, forms, fighting styles, and we get into occasionally theory, principles, and concepts. Tonight is a very, very special night. I've invited some really important people in the martial arts. These are the masters of Kenpo. They hold roughly a rank in the high end of our system, soon to be maybe eventually a 10th degree, a senior master of the arts, a grand master or whatnot. But they're here to share their insights of the martial arts. And so I'm going to go around and introduce all of my friends here. And I hope you get a chance that you can spend time with them. So let's go right from the top. Hello, let's start with Steve. Steve, introduce yourself to our group.
How are we doing? Steve Zalazowski. I'm in the Monterey Bay area of California presently, and been with Chuck Sullivan since about 2002. Run my school here in Salinas, and I'm privileged to be one of the directors of the International Karate Connection Association.
Moving right along, David, how are you, sir?
Myself?
Well, yeah, Dave Prosser. Let's go with you.
I'm doing fine. I'm Dave Prosser. I'm one of Dave Hebler's highest ranked black belts. Been with him since 1990. Prior to that, in 72, I started with Sterling Peacock. I was with him for a long time prior to Dave Hebler. So Hebler and I have a organization together, a school. It's called Pro Hebler, which is Prosser Hebler. And of course, he's in Texas now, so he's kind of, we're on the phone a lot talking about things, but it's all going good. It's going really good. We're happy.
Shoot over to Texas. Let's go down and say hello to Brian. Hello, Brian.
Hello, Paul.
Yeah.
My name is Brian Duffy. I'm here in Austin, Texas. My last formal instructor was Mr. Parker, but my lineage was through Steve LeBounty, and he and Tom Kelly were lifelong mentors to me. I've been training since 1970, and since 95, I've had my own organization, American Kenpo Federation. And pleasure to be here with all these great instructors.
Let's go down to Larry. Hello, Larry. How are you doing?
You know what? I'm doing really good, and thank you so much for inviting me. So I'm from Hollister, California, and not too far from Steve up there from Salinas. So we should get together. That'd be good to do that. But I do a lot with Santa Clara Kenpo under John Sepulveda, so up in the Bay Area. But I do want to just a quick shout out to Mr. Canaster for reaching out to me, and for Paul for being so gracious to have me on the call, and also to Brian Duffy, who's a great friend and somebody that I respect so much, as well as Marty Zaninovich, who we go way back, and I think that's part of the whole bounty lineage that we all share together, and I'm very thank you.
Shooting over to California, let's go down and say hello to my friend Casey Jones. Hello, Casey.
Greetings and peace, everyone. And hey, welcome everybody. It's good to be in fabulous company as I am. I'm Casey Jones. I'm with BKF. I started studies with Steve Saunders at the time, back in 1967. It's now Steve Mohammed. It's been a beautiful art for me. I appreciate it and enjoy it. And what it's done is it brought me a family that's across the United States and even internationally. So, I look forward to moving forward in more education. There's no way that I've learned it all. That's it.
Thank you so much, Casey. Let's slide over to San Diego and say hello to Gary. Hello, Gary.
Get my mic on there. Hello, how you doing, everyone? Gary Wilson, San Diego, California. American Family Kenpo Karate. I'm the founder of the 4.46 system and original Kenpo Karate Association. My current teacher's Senior Grandmaster Hebler, and I've been with him for probably 25 years, but also trained under Darby Darrell, my first instructor, and then from there, Willie Steele, and he took me up to 7th, and then Grandmaster Hebler 8th and 9th, and my system basically it's very basic system for self-defense, because I grew up on the streets. I was a street fighter, so that's what I try to teach is people to defend himself and be able to handle a situation on the street.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate you coming on. Let's go up to the Northeast. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Good, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. Dave Ghigliotty. I own West Bay Martial Arts Academy in Warwick, Rhode Island. And I'm a student of Chuck Sullivan's, Grandmaster Chuck Sullivan. And I started my Kenpo journey back in 1978 under Nick Serio. Had quite a few teachers between now and then, and found my home in the IKCA, and honored to be the membership director for the IKCA, and honored to be here tonight. Thank you.
Let's drop down to my friend Kenpo Joe. Hello, Joseph. How are you?
Good evening, gentlemen. Pleasure seeing everybody. I hope you're picking me up okay. Just worried about my bandwidth, but yeah. So my name's Joe Rebelo. A lot of people know me on the internet martial arts world as Kenpo Joe. Been involved in various Kenpo arts. I've been involved in martial arts since 1968. Been involved in Kenpo since 1975. Got involved in the IKK and Mr. Parker in 1983. Had the honor, the privilege, and pleasure of being beaten up by Mr. Parker on several occasions until his untimely passing in 1990. Got to work with various individuals such as Richard Planis, notably Frank Trejo, also David German from the Thai system, also Karazempo Goshin Jutsu through a Sonny Gascon's lineage, and several different Kenpo systems from different Oriental lineages. Hence the name Kenpo Joe.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm going down to Southern California now. Let me
Marty's-
start from there.
Okay, I'm Marty Zaninovich down in Los Angeles. Had the privilege and honor to come up with Mr. Beltramo and Mr. Duffy. And I just want to know, Mr. Duffy, how does your hair not turn white like the rest of ours? Is there something going on here? Yeah, I'm like yours, Larry. Mine's starting to go too. So, you know.
Mr. Swan,
You guys
my
are
old
lucky you
instructor,
have
has
some.
accused me of using Grecian for years, but I really don't.
Yeah, whatever you're doing it right. So I want a lesson on that when I see you.
Must be the water. Must be the water.
It's got to be the water. It's got to be the water. Came up to the Labani lineage, up to my first black, and then I switched over after I went to a seminar with Mr. Parker down in Tucson. And I've been with Mr. Planis, Richard Planis, for 40 plus years. And then the last 4 years going on now is I've been with Dan Andesano, studying the arts with him, and then Nene Gabakayan, which is a Blitnowak system. Been with him for about 5-6 years now. So that's in a nutshell where I'm going. And I'm still learning all the time. I'm figuring out what I don't know was quite a bit.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? When you were a first brown, you thought you had it all.
Yes, sir.
And now you get into being up in the higher ranks and you realize you have nothing. You're still really learning.
Yeah.
Finally, my good friend from up in Washington, who's friends with several of the people on this panel tonight, the very talented Todd Durgan. Hello, Todd. How are you?
Good. Sorry I'm late, sir. And thank you to Mr. Zalazowski for reminding me that I'm a bonehead and missed the call. Hello, gentlemen. Pleasure to see all of you.
Todd,
Likewise.
tell us a little bit who you are for those that don't know.
A little bit. I'm Todd Durgan up in the Northwest. But
The founder.
So
Okay.
I originally trained at the age of 11. I don't know who it was. I'm pretty sure it was Ed Parker Kenpo. I then later found a guy named Randy Borden. I know he trained in Kenpo and a bunch of other stuff. He was from Hawaii. He was actually a Hawaiian singer called Ed, Uncle Ed, as all Hawaiians do, I found out. Call everybody uncle and auntie. And then I trained in Okinawan karate for a couple of 2.5, 3 years with a gentleman who trained in Okinawa with one of the head guys under Funakoshi, and finally found Mr. Rainey and have been with him for the last 30 some years. As
And you're the founder of
Phasic Combatives Integrated. which
good.
Mr. Rebelo knows is a kind of a tribute to Dave German. Actually, he probably doesn't know that, but
You just told him, so now he knows.
yeah, Dave German was
Oh.
one of my favorite guys to watch. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, but I liked and appreciated the way that he put things together and the way that he was doing things, integrating the arts with his Thai karate. So I took note and started working on my own version or rendition of that as from about 93 on.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that with you. So we're going to run around the panel here. We're going to get some background. You know, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame incorporates about 14 different styles and systems, from Ed Parker Tracy, Hawaiian Kaju Kenpo, Lima Lama, Shaolin, Chinese Wan Fa, the IKCA. We also have, what else do we have? We have JKD and a few others. They're all forms of Kenpo. And the beauty of it is that we all walked into that school to learn how to protect ourselves. Other reasons as well. But let's go right into this. So I'm going to start with the panel, and I just need your responses just within a minute or so. Briefly give it. Let's go with you, Dave. Why did you go into martial arts?
Myself,
Yes.
this day?
Yes.
Well, I was actually, my dad was a professional boxer. And of course, because of that, I started boxing at a very early age. And my dad passed away when I was young. And I was at the boxing gym up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. That's where I grew up. And this man walked in, big bushy beard on him, in his 30s probably at the time, maybe younger, late 20s. And he asked if anybody wanted to spar. And of course, I was the first to jump up. I've won, you know, I did really well in boxing as a kid. And he tapped me on the chest and he said, "I'll hit you as hard as you hit me." Well, that's all it took. So I hit him pretty hard. And he smiled at me, knocked me down once. I got up, knocked me down twice. I got up. The third time, he put his foot on my chest and he said, "You don't want to get back up." And I asked him, or he told me, he says, "Would you like to learn Kenpo karate?" And I was like, "Is this Kenpo?" And he goes, "Yes, it is." And so the next day I was at his school, and that was Sterling Peacock, which later was Matt David. Yeah. And that was in '72 when I met him, you know, so that's how it all started. It wasn't a necessity for defending myself because I already was raised that way, but I just fell in love with Kenpo once I met him. Honestly, if it had been any other martial art, I probably wouldn't have been interested. But Kenpo, like probably all of us on this panel, it just fit me well. It was what I was looking for in extending my knowledge of self-defense, you know, because we all know that boxing has its limits. And I realized that Kenpo had everything I was looking for. And I was with him for a few years. So
what was the most impressive thing that he shared with you that you kept and you can share with us today?
The most impressive thing?
Lesson wise.
Probably to be able to not only be able to defend yourself, to become great at what you do, but at the same time to be able to be very humble about it. You know, I think that was one of the biggest things. And he was very humble about what he knew. The first time I was there, he had a heavy bag, a brand new one, and he kicked it with a round kick and split it in half, which I haven't seen since. And he was an amazing man. He really was. He had his ups and downs through life, as we all know. But you know, if it wouldn't have been for him, I never would have been in a Kenpo. Never would have started this system. Let's go to
KC Jones. KC, you walked into the school. How did you get introduced to the martial arts?
Yes, well, initially, you know, I grew up in an area split by two different gangs. We had the Crips and the Bloods. So in the area, if you didn't know how to fight, then, you know, you didn't go home. And of course, I like everybody else, I like going home every day. Walked into one of the parks in the area. There's this guy in these white pajamas. He's kicking and screaming. And I asked him, so why? I know it was karate, so can I join? He said, yeah, jump on in. So I've been with him ever since. And that was Steve Saunders. And shortly afterwards, he took on a school, and you know, I've been following him ever since. Of course, I've had a couple other styles like everyone else in between, and have a couple of, well, I'll call it mixed martial arts mixed in. But it came out of, you mentioned before, out of wanting to protect yourself. fear of getting beat up was my thing. And so I thought, hey, give me an advantage, and I got it. So that's where I got in.
Let's move on over down to Steve. Tell us a little bit how you got into the martial arts.
So the short version is I was the kid who was the very late bloomer. I didn't hit my full height until I was almost 26 years old. So I was the 5'2" entering sophomore year in high school type thing. And, you know, didn't grow up in the same environment that Casey did, thank goodness. But, you know, it was the walking down the hall, and then now I'm meeting the locker again, and now I'm meeting the other locker again, and then there's a trash can and all that stuff, right? So when I was 17, my best friend told me he was taking a self-defense class at our local college over here, and badgered me for about 3 months until I finally decided, okay, I'll go down with you. And it was the last 2 classes of the fall semester, which happened to work out to December 15th, 1998. Not knowing at the time what December 15th meant in the Kenpo world, I had no clue, but later on down the road, it kind of became a pretty significant date, right? So got involved with that one, and that teacher, I have to give him full credit. It was Hanchi Everett Rodriguez, and he lit my flame for studying anything and everything that I possibly could. I met Chuck Sullivan in 2002. I've been with him ever since, and had the very blessing to be on directly involved with several other styles and systems along the way, all of it designed to try to get as much information as I could about how to defend myself. Now, today, my job is to pass that along. So I will continue learning for that reason for the rest of my life.
So you can identify with Daniel LaRusso.
Unfortunately, yes, I just didn't live in Reseda. It's a little bit highbrow for where I was at. But
Yeah, it was that's the thing there. Brian Duffy, how did you get into the martial arts? You've been around for a bit.
Well, you know, my story is very similar to Steve's, the preceding story. I was a late bloomer as well. When I graduated high school, I was 5'4", weighed 110 pounds. You know, so I didn't reach my full growth. I had a growth spurt right after that when I was in college, but summer after high school, I was, me and a couple other guys were throwing insults back and forth at each other, just joking around. I got the better of this one guy who I didn't know very well, and he said, "Shut up, Duffy, before I stuff you in a trash can." And I was offended, you know, at that. But then I looked at him and I said to myself, you know, if he really wanted to stuff me in a trash can, I don't think there's a whole lot I could do to stop him. You know, I didn't like that. So I went down, and when I drove to register for college about a month later in San Antonio at the junior college there, I passed a karate school. And after registering for classes at the junior college, when I drove back, I stopped in at the karate school. It was a Kenpo school, and I signed up, and that's how I started.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let's go over to Joe Rebelo. Mr. Rebelo, tell us about your journey. How did you start out?
Well, I was 7 years old, and I was doing father-son horseplay with my dad, and my dad hit me with a karate chop and dropped me. And instead of crying, I looked up at him and I said, "What was that?" And he goes, "That's karate." I'm like, "What's karate?" And he was studying with a gentleman by name of Dave Schuster, who ran a Kyokushinkai dojo in New Bedford called the House of Oyama. And at that time, and for those of you who may be familiar with Maso Yama, that was a man who killed bulls with his bare hands. And so there was no children in that school. They didn't allow children at that time. They didn't allow women in at that time. It was a man's only club. So my dad would teach me little things here and there. And I was born grossly pigeon-toed. I couldn't run like the other children. As a very small child, I wore braces, and they finally, my feet straightened somewhat. But anyway, he would teach me little things. I remember being in 3rd grade, and they would always pick on me and beat me up because I was overweight because of that. I remember some kid, Jim Parker, of all, James Parker, never forget, I was 3rd grade, hits me in the back of my head. And I remember my karate training that I learned from my dad, and threw out a nukate, spear hand. And as I did, it went up under his eyelid, over his eyeball, and touched the optic nerves that attached to his brain. And I watched this young man roll on the floor, screaming at the top of his lungs. And I started crying. I'm 9 years old. I just wanted him to stop hitting me. And so that really affected me. And then when I was a teenager, I went to a local high school, St. Anthony's High School. And a friend of mine, Eric Chevalier, was studying at one of the original United Studios of Self-Defense that was created by Fred Villari right after he had broken away from Nick Syria. So I went there, and they had a 3-month special for the summer going on. And that's how I started in Kenpo. And my instructor at the time was a gentleman, Fred E. Hosmer. We just called him Ed, ironically. You know, two biggest inspirations of my martial arts career were both named Ed. So Ed Hosmer was my instructor. And then I got involved in all different forms of martial arts and always loved Kenpo. I always say Kenpo, how to rip, gouge, maim, and mutilate for fun and profit. Buy the t-shirt. In 1983, I tested for my black belt. And right after that, person who I had worked with, Leo Lacert, had contacted Mr. Parker. And right at that time, Mr. Parker was coming back into New England. He had been asked by Tony and Doreen Cogliandro and Nick and Nancy Serio and Kalai Griffin to come back to New England and restart the IKKA. So I was very fortunate to get on the ground level with that. And I actually wanted to buy an Ed Parker franchise. Long story short, that didn't work out, but Mr. Parker never forgot that. And I would take him at his word. He said, you know, if you have a question, ask me. And he used to have these little green notebooks that he used to talk about. He'd write in notes. He'd wake up 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd remember something. He'd write notes. So I would do that. I'd write my bingo, right? Those little notebooks, man. So if you have a question, so every time I saw Mr. Parker, I had a question. And, you know, Ed Parker, to hear is to doubt, to see is to be deceived, to feel is to believe. So Ed Parker made me a believer because he would always demonstrate on me at various seminars. I follow him like a groupie. Yeah, I've got the Dane Bramage from Kick'em Boxing, right?
Okay.
But
all right.
Yeah, it was such a
Thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate that, Joseph. Let's go over to Gary Wilson. Gary, give us a little bit of your background. I know it's very interesting because you and I have talked about that before. So speak up, Gary.
Yeah, as a young kid, I grew up in South Lansing, Michigan, and before we came to California, and it was a pretty nasty neighborhood, and my cousins and all of us lived in the same neighborhood, my brother, and we all hung together because we were in fights every day going back and forth to school. And when it came to California, it kind of continued because we came in mid-year, so we had to, me and my brother both had to prove ourselves, you know, mid-year that we'd handle ourselves, and I enjoyed the fight. I loved fighting, like Dave Prosser, as he knows. We both love to fight, you know, like to get hit. So anyways, I always liked, you know, karate, watching it, Bruce Lee and everything else. And as I got older, at 18, my dad told me that if I continued fighting, I was going to end up in jail now because I was an adult. So that's when I started thinking about taking karate, and I looked up, found Lemon Grove Kenpo, which was actually, there was a picture of Ed Parker in the yellow pages, and it said Ed Parker's Karate. And actually didn't interest me a lot because I was looking for somebody with an Oriental name because that's what I was seeing with Bruce Lee and in all the movies, you know. But I thought, you know what, it's close by. I went down there, took my first introductory lesson, and I was hooked. And from there, I mean, it was 6 days a week training. You know, I'm always on the mat. It's something that I love and continue doing. And studied under Darby Darrow, which was a San Diego police officer. Then he became SWAT, and we trained the San Diego police down there and arrest and restraint techniques. And then he brought in some Navy SEALs. We used to work with the SEALs, and you know, I continued my training in pressure points and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 7.5 years. But I always dabbled in other arts to see, you know, if Ed Parker's Kenpo was really American Kenpo was for me, and it definitely was. I like to fight up close and personal, and that's the way Parker's system is. And I don't like throws, takedowns, and you know, wrestling on the ground. I want to stay on my feet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Sharon. Larry, let's go over to you. Larry, you have a camaraderie ship with several of the guys here on the panel. Tell us a little bit about your background. Just get us an introductory.
Yeah, you know, for me, it started with boxing. That's you know, my dad was a very physical person. You know, he was like a high school, you know, all-state player in California, and everything was about hitting people, right? And so we went into boxing, and I did that for about 5 years. I started when I was about 13, and then, you know, I went to work, and I started it. I said, I need to do something with the martial arts a little bit more. I was intrigued. So I didn't know any better. So I started with the hard style Japanese, very linear style. And that was good for a little while. And then I got transferred to the night shift and they weren't open. So I was looking for another school and I found actually it was a Tracy's karate school. Actually wasn't Tracy's at the time, but they were an offshoot of Tracy's. But, in the long run, that was probably really good for me because the owner and his best friend were really, really good kickboxers. And so I trained with them, and then that led me to, because both of them were sparring partners with Joe Louis. So I was able to go down and spar with Joe Louis quite a bit. And it was just, I learned so much from that guy. But at some point though, with my Kenpo, I was like, you know what, there's more to the story. I need to know the why. I need to know what's going on here with the principles and things like that. And that's when I shifted over to John Sepulveda, who I'd known for many years, to his tournaments and things like that. And, that was awesome because he turned me on to so many different things and turned my training in a different way and allowed me to do some sport karate, which I hadn't done before, but which was, really fun. And, especially when I went to Europe, because I went to Europe, I fought in Europe 85 times and had, but Europe is different than the United States. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, unless you like totally break something on somebody, you're not going to get a point deducted for, too much contact, which was awesome. I love that. I kind of moved on, Mr. LeBounty became such a huge influence in my life. He became a great mentor to me and somebody that helped me with my training and, would talk me through things and then I got involved in an MMA school, a very successful MMA school. And I was their striking coach and, I learned some grappling and everything there. And now I'm kind of teaching out of my garage and I've got several students that come in and works and some really good fighters and, we help them get ready for things. And it's just something that has just been really good. And I have nothing negative to say about the whole martial arts experience because to me, it's like I remember either Mr. LeBounty or Mr. Kelly told me, the martial arts will never leave you, right? You may leave it, but it's not going to leave you. So, it's just been something that's just been a passion for me for my whole life. And it's awesome. And I'm thankful to be on this call. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really insightful. Most people don't realize, even though Ed Parker had schools all over the world and Pasadena was his main, place to train, he spent more time teaching people in his house or at the dinner table. I'm just tell you right now, there was a lot more stories I learned from that man there. Let's go over to Marty Z. Marty, just quickly. I mean, you have a background. You're associated with a lot of the guys that are here on the panel today. Give us just an insight quickly of how you got into the martial arts.
My story is similar to everybody else's. You grew up in a small little farm town. Then I lived down on the border in Nogales, Arizona, and Mexico. So, I was the token down there, and I had to prove myself every time I went somewhere. And I went into an Aldacaso school a couple of times, and that was an experience when they come across from the other side of the line, and they don't care who you are, But and I'd call Mr. LeBounty up, and I'd tell him that, and he'd laugh his head off, And it's the same thing that Mr. Beltramo was saying, and Mr. Duffy. We got to get associated with some great people. I started out in judo when I was probably 11-ish, and then I just wasn't satisfied with it. I wanted kicking and punching. My dad was in the military in the Navy and stationed over in the Philippines. So, he wouldn't tell me a lot of the in-depth stories, but I heard a lot of the things that went on there, which excited me a bit. And then I ended up finding a Kenpo school right next to my mom and dad's house, which was under the David E. Menace regime, which was a LeBounty NCKK school. So that's how my story started. And then when I met Mr. LeBounty and Mr. Kelly and Mr. Duffy and Mr. Beltramo, how could you go wrong? I mean, you know, it's like when if you don't show up, I always remember Mr. Labonte saying, you better be going to a funeral, your own, you know, so, you know, so I always made it a point to go. My Kenpo career was exciting for me. I learned a lot, and like I said, I had some great mentors there, and it continued. I was in Arizona, and I went to a seminar with Mr. Parker, and he went through all the forms 1 through 6. And at that point in time, I just barely had gotten my black belt a year and a half earlier, and I knew that's where I wanted to go. It was so enlightening to me, and I went back, asked permission from, you know, Mr. Labonte, Mr. Menace, everybody involved, and they gave me the blessings, and that's when the journey started. And boy, hadn't stopped yet. And I hooked up with Mr. Planis, and you know, I continue learning, continue having questions. You know, been exposed to some greats throughout the time. Studied with his brother in the Filipino martial arts, which got me introduced to that. That's probably 30 years ago. And then I had the same epiphany there. You know, I started wanting to study with Mr. Dan Nasano, and it's still ongoing. I mean, you never, ever learn everything there is to grasp out there. Every time you think you got it, it changes, and you have to reevaluate and continue being that student. I see him at 86 years old, still taking lessons. So, you know, that's a pretty good mentor there from my perspective. But I'm very grateful that you invited me on, and thank you to everybody that's touched my life here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marty. You're, you know, the commonality I'm finding here, you know, well, we have two guys from the same system here. We just talked to Steve. So let's go up to Dave up in the Northeast. Dave, tell us briefly how you got into Kenpo.
Sure. Pretty simple story,
I'm
actually.
not limiting to Kenpo. How did you get into the martial arts? Let's take it from there.
Okay. Pretty simple story. I was probably 7th, 8th grade or so when I was being bullied. I mean, it was just one of those, you know, you mentioned Daniel LaRusso. Well, there's so many parallels between the Karate Kid story and me that it could have been written about me, to be honest. Even the bike incident where he rode down the hill and the guys got him and they beat him up. Well, that was me. So anyway, my mother had, she knew what I was going through. She was a single mom, and God rest her soul, she worked 2 jobs to put me through karate classes and that. But anyway, she had a friend who is also another notable East Coast Kenpo guy now, but at the time he was a student, and he was, you know, he cuts hair for a living. It's kind of strange that the man that got me involved in karate and Kenpo was a hairdresser, and now my teacher was a retired barber. So there's a lot of parallels here. But anyway, I went and got my hair cut, and he says, just the same thing that you see in the movies. He's like, hey man, you really got to take some karate lessons. And I was like, you know, okay, you know, I got a mouse here and all beat up. And so he took it upon himself to pick me up in one afternoon, and we went over to Nick Sirio's Kenpo Karate here in Rhode Island. Now, back then in Rhode Island, there were not many choices. Of course, this was prior to the internet. We had the yellow pages. So we had one page. There was Taekwondo, 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 Nick Sirio's Kenpo, Taekwondo, Taekwondo, Taekwondo. So there wasn't a whole lot to choose from. And he was a Kenpoist. He was studying at the time. And I went in and I watched the class, and I was like, wow, I was just totally blown away. And I begged my mother to take classes after that point, and that's what started my journey in the martial arts. And I've dabbled in other arts, and as many of the folks here have, but it was a very common story, I would say. I was bullied, and I was put to the point where I needed it for self-defense and just to be able to deal with life at school, which a lot of times older folks don't realize what these kids actually go through and how traumatic it can be. So yeah, that's what I try to do now, is to help people overcome those types of obstacles and push the art forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to go. We spoke to Todd earlier, and he gave us a little bit of background. I'm going to go around the panel here now, and let's focus in on our martial arts. When you were coming up in the martial arts, obviously we had a commonality of not getting our butts kicked, and except for Dave Prosser, he could kick everybody's butt anyway. No comment there, Dave.
I don't know what to say. Hey, something I want to throw out though that I forgot.
Go ahead.
Ralph Castellanos was a big mentor of mine and a good friend and one of my instructors. So he just, I don't know if these people know, but he just passed away here a few months ago. And I have never met a finer man in my life. And Gary, Todd, and yourself can all agree with me on that. He was a great
Oh, he's a
man.
wonderful guy. I remember when he was nominated and inducted into the Kenpo
Yes.
Karate Hall of Fame,
Yes.
and his son came down, and he was just like a little kid.
Yes.
Just like a little kid. See,
Yeah.
the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame was created because of my relationship with Ed Parker and Frank Trejo. It was premised on those two men.
Right.
Mr. Parker was bringing people together, recognizing their contributions to the martial arts through their own efforts. You didn't get in because of your friendship or your best buddy, or you paid, which is what most places do today. It seems that we pay to play for everything, including rank. And that's wrong. I think you need to earn it. If you do earn it, you'll be recognized by your peers. And that is through hard work. Trejo was the inspiration, and what he had to fight as a fighter his whole life, overcoming the obstacles of coming from the ghetto. And he could have gone a bad path. And instead he became a world champion, and he inspired many people, including me. So it is a celebration of greatness. Dave Prosser is one of our Hall of Fame members. Casey Jones is one of our Hall of Fame members. Todd Durgan is one of our Hall of Fame members. Gary Wilson is one of our Hall of Fame members. Brian Duffy is a member of the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame, and Marty Zaninovich. So hopefully Larry, Dave, and Steve, you guys will be a part of that soon because of your contributions. And, you know, it is open to everyone. And what I call it is a celebration of greatness. Tonight, I'm really honored to have all of you on this panel to talk about how you got into the martial arts, what inspired you. I can relate to every one of these questions or responses because I lived it. I remember one thing, and we're going to get into Todd on this. I remember I went into the passage, and they're teaching me a grappling technique, right? The guy grabs me and I'm blocking him when I hit him, delayed sword, right? And so I get home and I go to my brother Chris and I go, Chris, I was at karate today. He goes, yeah, I want to show you what they taught me. No, I don't want to know what they taught you. You're going to hit me. I said, well, you got to grab me first. So Todd, what is it that you got when you walked into there? What inspired you in those first techniques, which you brought back and now you share with your students? Come on, tell us about it.
You mean when I first started martial arts, or
Yeah, what really got you jazzed about, like, wow, I'm learning something that's so cool?
Well, my beginning was nothing like these guys. Mine was about survival at home. So my motivation was completely and entirely different. But the fact that I felt more confident in the ability, my first freestyle match, I knocked the guy out that threatened he was going to tear me apart. So purely by accident, mind you, but that empowered me to understand that there was something more to this that would help me, you know, through my, 11th and 12th year of life. So when I move into teaching and helping my students, what do I want to do? I want them to be able to understand that there's not only is there more to get, but what you're getting will enable you to better protect yourself, your family, God, and country.
Thank you. Brian, what is it you instill in your students, that the lessons you learned when you first started out in martial arts?
Well, kind of like what Marty said, is the fact that, you got to show up, you got to come. I was never one of the better guys in the studios when I first started out, there were always guys that were more talented, stronger, faster, did much better than I, but I outlasted them. You got to be there for the long haul, and we talk about this in the belt promotion. We talk about the 3 L's when we make the belt, with the old belt and the new belt, the L, right? And the 3 L stand for, 1, lie. If the promotion's a lie, you shouldn't pick it up. 2 is longevity, and I talked to him about second, I'm sorry, is loyalty to your instructor, to your association, to the art. And then longevity in a number of ways. One, that the martial arts is a healthy thing to do and makes our body stronger, increases your longevity that way. Also, martial arts is you're learning things, self-defense, to prolong your longevity if someone tries to take it away from you. And the third thing I tell them about it is that longevity is one of the true attributes of a martial artist, that a lot of people come and try what we do, but in order to get the true benefits out of the training, it's got to be something that you stick with. So just coming in and showing up and doing the best you can on a daily basis is very important. I've got a couple of comments I'd like to make based on things that a couple of guys have said. Mr. Prosser talked about Ralph Castellanos, and I just want to note that we've talked about, several of us have talked about Mr. LeBounty, but Mr. LeBounty's studio years ago in Fresno, one of his early studios, was the starting place for he was there. Tom Kelly came out of that studio. Huck Planis came out of that studio. Ralph Castellanos came out of that studio, right? And my old instructor, Gary Swan, his senior student, came out of that studio, so we're talking about commonalities. All of those people have gone around and spread the art. It's just great. Mr. LeBounty had the saying that Larry was talking about. The actual saying he had was, "You will leave the art before the art leaves you." And I tell that to my students when they say, "Oh, I need to take a break," or whatever. I'll tell them a couple of different things. I'll say, one thing, if you take a break, the likelihood is that you're not going to come back. And the second thing is, if you do come back, it's going to be for a lot longer time than you ever thought. But you will leave the art before the art leaves you. When you come back, it'll be there, for you to take back up. And the last thing I'd like to mention real quick is, I was never a great fighter in terms of, a tournament champion. Fighting was an aspect that I really had to work at. But I eventually came to what I felt was fairly competent. I competed in a lot of tournaments. There's a couple of times in my tournament career that during about the middle of the match, I was just so happy that it wasn't a real fight, because these people just had my number. I couldn't score on them. They were hitting me at will. And one of those people was when I fought Larry Beltramo in Hawaii in 1994 at a tournament one of John Sepulveda's guys had over there. And it was just one of those times when I said, man, I'm glad we're not really fighting, because he'd be kicking my ass right now. He just had everything. He's an excellent fighter.
Well, there's 2 things I want to say about that. One, Marty is from Fresno, because we just spent some time up there, and that was great. And thank God Casey Jones wasn't there. Here, I want to say something. The one thing I really like, and this is something we use a lot in Kenpo. We use a lot of quotes and phrases and such. And Brian is right, because that relates to our history, our lineage, who we come from. There's reasons why they're said. And Mr. Parker, in his famous book, The Zen of Kenpo, he says, like analogies and short stories, the imagery invoked through quotes / sayings also breathes life into the technical descriptions and principles of Kenpo. So thank you for saying that. Again, I will refer to Mr. Parker because he wanted us to be thinking martial artists, not just how to do something. And it seems to be the common temperature right now. Show me how to do 5 swords so I look good. My analogy, or it would be as a metaphor, I look great because I have a car that's painted red. Looks like it goes fast. Has nothing to do with what the car can do. It just looks good. And because of that, I'm going to ask Gary Wilson, what's the truth about that, Gary? You're working with young guys. What's the current status inside your school versus what you see out in the real world?
Well, I try to make the situation for them more realistic. You know, I explain to them, you know, when somebody's attacking you, they're streetwise. You know, it's not another martial artist is usually going to come up and start a fight. Maybe some MMA guys or something, but you know, it's mostly usually going to be gangbangers or just a hoodlum, somebody just wanted to cause trouble, and it's a lot of times it's more than one opponent. And you know, I try to tell them, you know, realistically think about it, that when you get hit and you turn your I see this all the time. Person turns their head, they get hit, boom, and then they stay there and they go, well, the next you know, the next strike isn't lined up because the guy's head's turned. I said, that's because he's not turning around looking at you. I said, a streetwise person is going to turn their head right back. They're going to eyeball you immediately and give you the center line. So I say, you know, understand that they're always going to be right when you hit them. You do delayed sword, you know, it's like right behind it's coming a left roundhouse punch. So they have to be prepared for that. And I try to make sure that they hit their targets because, you know, I got hit at junior high school. There was 3 of us that, you know, kind of had a reputation, and the guy that had the biggest reputation, nobody wanted to fight him. And I was afraid he was going to kill me, you know, and he wanted to fight me. And we showed up, and I always talk about this one because it was just amazing. My mom actually was one because she was German, hot tempered, and she always told me, she said, you know, if somebody starts a fight, you finish it, but you don't start a fight. And I never did start a fight, but I always let him usually punch me in the face before I did the next move, you know, which is something that's harder to come out of. And I was expecting him to punch me in the face. And I got all these kids around there, and I was scared to death he was going to kill me. And he hit me as hard as he could, but he hit me in the sternum. And it made this loud thud. And I fell back like 6 feet, got my balance again. And I got a big smile on my face, and everybody looked and they were like, whoa. And then I stood up and I got a big smile on my face because it didn't hurt. So then I stood back up to him and I walked up to him, and he just completely did not want to fight me. He just gave me everything he got. He just hit me in the wrong spot. And he goes, I don't want to fight you. And he walked away, and everybody started to go, chicken, you know. And I'm like, no, chill out. Let him go, you know. And I never roused him or anything else. I'm like, you know, this guy's going to kill me if he would have punched me in the face. And that's what I was expecting. But you can take a pretty good blow, I found out, to the sternum. and it was just, for me, that was the first time somebody done that. And I was like, wow, you know. So I got a big smile on my face, not meaning anything by it, but I intimidated him when I did it.
You know, I'm going to jump over to Steve and Dave because they're both from the same organization. And their grandmaster, Chuck Sullivan, is from old school. Remember, this is early 60, well, 59 until 62 when he made his black. But the point is direct, hardcore, in your face, no nonsense, kick his ass kind of Kenpo. That was it back then. I mean, it was pretty direct. And am I right about that, gentlemen? And he still talks about that. If you're going to do it, get into it. So I'm going to let you two answer that quickly, going back and forth between you. What are the lessons that Mr. Sullivan is trying to instill in you so you can share that with these students that walk in? What's the importance or the common thing that he wants you to know?
Dave.
Okay, well, that's an easy one for me. In my profession, I'm a commercial fisherman, and for those of you guys that know commercial fishermen, they like to fight a lot. It's very territorial out there, and it usually gets brought back to the dock. Now, one of the things that Mr. Sullivan, and what I think really endeared me to him in his teachings was the preemptive strike, and how to use our art in a preemptive fashion, because a lot of times you don't want to wait for that person to make the first move. Their action is going to be quicker than your reaction a lot of times. And so a lot of times, and through conversations with Mr. Sullivan and myself, and talking about different ways that we can manipulate the art, you know, in the beginning, as most arts, we step back, create distance, the very defensive, that type of a thing. But then it turns into an offensive activity. And that, I think, to me, has really been beneficial in studying under him and in the IKCA. We, you know, as far as I know, as far as I teach in my school, we do a lot of that situational awareness type stuff, where if that person is encroaching on your space, you have to go. You cannot wait. And Steve, I mean, please to jump in. I don't mean to monopolize this at all, but that's one of the things I think with the teachings from him that really meant a lot to me, what really resonates with me.
I mean, Chuck was one of the first ones that I've been able to find in my research, where he used to take people outside the back of the dojo and spar in the alley behind the dojo, or they bring furniture onto the mat and turn off the lights and have to fight your way around the furniture. And so reality-based training has always been part of what he's done. And that's really one of the big lessons that I've taken away from him with that. The other piece, the other two pieces I can easily compress down into very short sentences are: only perfect practice makes perfect. So you've got to be prepared for the unknown, but you've got to have your stuff dynamite, so when the unknown hits there, you're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is, I don't know that you can get a better example for consistency in longevity in the martial arts. He's been going since February of 1959. He's still on the mat teaching every
Yes, he is, and he's going to be 91 next
week.
month.
I don't know that you're ever going to see another career as 91 on November 13th.
Amazing person.
I mean,
Passion for life.
there's
You know,
not
and
many
I'm-
guys that have been at it that long in history of any martial art. So.
You know, the nicest thing that Danny Insano said when we were down there for those 3 hours, it was supposed to be 30 minutes, 3 hours there, Marty, with Danny and Asano, little kids. Danny says, "How are you doing this? What are you doing? I'm going to be 85. You're 90? Wow." And then he said to him, he said, "You and Bruce would have been the best of friends, because their common goal was combat, effective, not a bunch of nonsense." Frank Trejo had the first lesson I ever learned from Frank was simple. He says, if you're not right in the head, don't get in the ring. So let me talk to 3 fighters that like to fight a lot. They're very proficient at it. One, his whole organization is based on fighting, which is the BKF. Larry, obviously, you've very shared with us what your background. And then Dave, you've been involved with it as a Golden Gloves fighter, and then you incorporated Hebler's system of fighting. All through is pretty direct. Let's go with you 3 gentlemen and give us an insight on that mindset that you need to have as a fighter in that ring. And I'll start with KC.
You know, the first one I wanted to bring up, I thought about is I learned to be tenacious and never give. But the biggest thing that we all know between us is, in a fight, you're going to get hit. Right next door to the 103rd Street School on Western, there was Sportsman's Park. The Crips used to be there. We used to call it Crip banging. So right after class, we'd go next door, and we were in a real fight each day after we left the school. So it was a understanding of, yes, I'm going to get hit, but what do I do next? How do I recover? And how do I resolve being hit? And that was like the big thing for me. That was a big thing for all of us. We weren't supposed to do it, but we fought there almost every day after fighting 5-6 hours at the school. Tenacious.
Larry, what's your thoughts on that?
You know, that's really pretty spot on, Casey. That's, you know, in my world, it's about how you prepare yourself and how you train. And if you train, you have to train with contact. And, you know, that's just how I was brought up. And that's where I started when I was a very young man, and took it all the way through, and all with John Spolvin and And Seagull and Bounty was, you know, you have to prepare to be hit. And you're going to have some dents and some, Marty, you can appreciate this, right? It's like, you're going to have some dents, and you're going to have some bruises, but you know what? You have to push through those things, because that's going to happen. But when you become comfortable with that, now you're dangerous, because you can control the situation. So because most people aren't used to being, even though they may think they're the toughest person in the world, but you know, they're really not until you really hit them. And you know, and if you can take that first onslaught, or maybe that first shot, or whatever it is, or maybe they counter punch you or counter kick you, whatever it is, and you can live with that, then that's very important. So every time we train with my guys, we train that way. I mean, it's a lot of contact, and even as old as I'm getting right now, we still do it. And because it's very important to me, because it's like, if I'm going to defend myself, I have to have that shield up. I have to be able to know I can do it. And that's a big confidence factor for a lot of people.
Dave Prosser's no stranger to getting hit, because if you're a boxer in the caliber that you were at, Dave, you know what it looked to take hits. Okay, so the conditioning. Tell us the difference between how you train your students in the school, and I know you work them hard, versus what you're seeing out there in the training.
Well, we train for street defense, bottom line. So physical fitness is huge with us. My students all work out hard, cardio, along with the martial arts and weightlifting. We learn to shoot everything. We train our guys, you know, more often than not with shoes on. We have them come in with their regular street clothes on. We'll do the same thing. All these guys are on spot with what we do. Basically, we believe in all of that. We set up the studio. We'll put bags in the way. We'll put chairs in the way. We'll have the lights out. We've even had times we'll drink 3 or 4 beers and spar just to see what it's like to have a buzz going while we're doing it, which gets pretty wild sometimes.
And you didn't call any of us up.
Yeah, and then after the fact, we'll drink and celebrate. So, but then we also do, situational awareness. You know, but your wife may be with you, your kid may be with you. It might be road rage. You got, which we all know. I mean, all these guys here. I mean, we have hundreds of years of experience between the 9 or 10 of us here, and we all know that a fight isn't a perfect scenario. It's never going to go the way you may think it will. You know, so you have to train for any and all situations. You know how many times you see guys getting punched during the Antifa thing, the people getting punched from the back and people kicking them down and beating people to a pulp. I mean, you know, we try to be as real as we can with what we train. We don't do any training for tournament fighting, anything like that. We just go hardcore street defense, you know, with physical training with it. And it may not be the perfect situation. Everybody may not agree with it, but that works with Mr. Hebler and myself with what we teach.
Good. I'm going to jump down to the unknown, and we're going to go down to one of the Fresno boys who's had a lot of experience with being on the mat and really feeling the pain, but he also deals with weapons that can all of a sudden jump out at you. See, we're talking empty hand for the most part. Somebody's pushing you, maybe some grabbing, throwing, punching, some kicking. But what happens when the clowns jump out and you're training your students, Marty, about weapons, how to be aware of those things? What are you doing with that?
Weapons training brings a whole new dynamic to the fight. If you start looking at a lot of the reports from the police and from more so in the ER, because you get more of a true, report from there, you're talking over 50% of fights now are taking place with a blunt object, or it's not like the movies when you see it. It generally will come in stealth, and you're going to get plunged before you even know it. It's like Guru Nasano always tells it. It's the all-time equalizer. It'll equalize anybody, anytime, any place, but it's an up-close and personal weapon, and you've got to have the intent to utilize it. Just to pull it out to try to scare somebody is probably the biggest mistake. You're going to get hurt, or that knife will come back at you. It's like Mr. Beltramo was saying too. You got to get used to getting hit. When we used to come up in the Labani lineage, he said, if you can't get, your hand in there and punch his lungs out, you're not doing it right. It just ain't happening. He laughed at me when I went over and I started training full contact stick fighting with the Dog Brothers. Now that was nasty as nasty can be. That gave me a whole new appreciation of getting hit with a 31-inch stick that was 1.5 inches round, and they didn't really care what they did to you. I'll share a little story. When I first went in there with Mark Denny, he said to bring some safety equipment. So I brought all the hockey gear, and I thought, I'd be the smart guy and get it in there and protect myself. As soon as I walked in with all that gear, he looked at me. He said, I thought you were a tough Kenpo guy. And I thought, oh, God. And I called Mr. Labonte up. He's, now what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to put the volleyball pads on and the fencing mask and go back in there and take my medicine. But it was an education, and the training for it was second to none. I'd go home looking like a zebra, after that day was done, but it taught me a lot. And Mr. Labonte, he'd always ask me, he says, you still sticking with it? I said, yeah, he's not going to run me off. I said, do I like it? No, I don't like it, but I said, it's bringing a value to what I do. It's adding to my training with the Inosanto lineage, and it's giving me more in my Kenpo too, because it's giving me a different aspect of reality of what could happen. And it does bring a whole new set of rules, especially with that knife. The knife will bring things you do not even want to think about. And the more I do knife work, the more I want to stay away from it. People carry it, but it's like they tell us down at the academy, don't carry a knife, unless you absolutely have to, because there is consequences if you pull it, and more so because you probably will use it when it's out. We had one of our guys in there, he's 22 years old, and he was a boxer. Good. I mean, very good. And he had a heart of gold, and the kid could fight. He could fight like nobody's business. He and his dad were getting ready to go somewhere, and there was a fight. So he jumped in to break it up. Somebody jumped him, stabbed him, killed him, 22 years old, ended his life. So that blade, it'll come in, it'll get you, and you don't even know it got you. There's a lot of things that go with that too, in the training aspects of it. Like Guru always tells us in Asano, he says, just because you get stabbed doesn't mean you're dead. So it's all about wound management from that point forward. If you start getting more than a couple, and depending where it's placed and how it's placed, is a whole different category there.
Let's go to three people that have experience training with guns. I know for a fact Dave Prosser, Casey Jones had a lot of experience with all his years in law enforcement. And I know Todd has had some experience training with guns. You three gentlemen, what's the big deal with us confronting the handguns that we're seeing today now out in the streets?
Well, in my opinion, a knife is more deadly than a gun in most situations, so and you have to remember too, if you do shoot someone, if you do have a gun, the movies, they fall over dead. That doesn't necessarily happen. They might still keep coming at you depending where you hit them. They're going to bleed out, and it takes a little bit to bleed out depending on where you shot them. So in gun defense, I'm really reluctant on even teaching my people much gun defense, knife defense, because I don't want to create a bad scenario for a new student to where they're thinking they're efficient at it.
You do make them aware of it.
We make them aware of it, yes, but I agree with what he was saying is it's a knife and a gun are just deadly weapons, and that's a whole different area of teaching in the martial arts. We tend to stay away from it. We do teach minor gun and knife attacks, club attacks, of course, but we try to stay. We don't want to give them this false feeling of confidence when, as you guys know, it takes a long time to get good at defending yourself against knives and guns. You're going to get cut with a knife. We all know that. So I've had a knife pulled on me 2 times. Both times I've been cut. And I thought I did a pretty good job at it. And thank God I did. But cut when a knife is pulled on you, it's just going to happen, So
let's go to the gun thing goes.
I don't know.
Todd, you work with that. Tell me your thoughts on those.
Yeah, it's not my favorite thing to do with any weapon. I think understanding the particular weapon is very important. One of the things I like about what Mr. Zaninovich does is he's working with multiple weapons, multiple ranges, multiple types of awareness, and acceptance. You go back to the 8 considerations. You have to have acceptance of like Mr. Prosser said, you're going to get cut. If there's a knife coming out, you're going to get cut. If there's a stick coming out, you're probably going to get whacked once or twice. If there's a gun coming out, give them your freaking money, let them take it and walk home. Otherwise, be prepared to get shot and or shoot somebody. And so, that's part of that acceptance thing. I'm not big on teaching the gun thing. I teach it for awareness. I teach it for understanding. And I teach it because it's certainly a real possibility in today's world, both guns and knives, probably even more so than a stick. But it's certainly not my favorite thing to do.
Going over to KC. Let's talk to Casey. Casey, now we're law enforcement. There's a little bit of a different standard for you as a police officer, and you know that you're going to probably engage with bad people because that's what happens with police officers. So you're more aware of that. On the street, though, now you're a civilian. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? You still carry?
Yes, I still carry. I have a current CCW now. But to both points, you both had you were on point 100%. As far as defense against a knife, my thing is, put your track shoes on and go the other direction because I don't want to be cut. As far as being shot, hey, here's my wallet, here's my keys, take my wife.
You got them in the wrong order.
I think so, huh? Do that all over again. As law enforcement, so we're given, and we all accept this. We all know that a knife is just as deadly as a gun, even more so. I've seen people use a knife from the Inosanto group, and they could peel and core an apple before you can say stop. So a trained person with a knife is more dangerous than the gun. Within my, and I'll share this one short story, I'm gonna put it in a nutshell. So I was involved in a couple of shootings in the past, and one of them happened to be a guy with a machete. There are 4 other units that showed up, and I'm sure that we shot off, I think it was like 60 rounds. Out of the 60 rounds that were fired, this guy got, to your point, got hit 17 times, but he kept on coming forward with this machete. Finally, at some point, because we only have 6.6 pints of blood, finally weakened and fell out because he bled out. But just imagine, we shot him. I just see there was that much lead in there. We only hit him 17 times. I was doing this, feared that this guy is going to chop you. As a citizen, a private citizen with a CCW, it's another story altogether because now you're dealing with your attorney, you're dealing with their family because you just took a life. You're going to be sued. I promise that. But hey, my goal is to go home every day because I do have the wife at home. I've got to come home to my wife and my kids each and every day. And if it's a choice between the two of us, it's always going to be me going home and telling the story, just as I'm telling you a story here today.
My brother had several confrontations with
Paul.
Yes, sir.
Paul, can I make a comment?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Brian.
I want to go back to something that Marty said. He was talking about, if you just think about pulling a weapon out to scare somebody, pull a knife out to scare somebody, you never want to, I tell my guys this as well. I said, don't carry a knife or any other weapon if you're not willing to commit to using it to its fullest extent. Because if you're not going to use it to its fullest extent, it becomes a liability instead of an asset to you. Correct. And years ago, I was working as security at a bar. We were having some problems with some bikers, and there was a biker out in the parking lot. He was drunk and he was slicing at people. He'd actually slightly cut one of the other security guys. And I used to carry a knife, and I always thought, if I need to, I can take it out and use it. And so he's out there slicing, and for a second, my hand went to my knife, and fortunately for me, I had a moment of clarity because I said, if you pull this knife out, then you're in a knife fight with this guy. And it's not going to stop until one of you is too bloody and cut up to continue, and are you willing to commit to doing that? And at that point in time, I realized I was not willing to commit to cutting somebody up like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't carried a knife for defense since then. I prefer a blunt weapon because you can adjust the amount of damage that you do based upon a situation. You can use pain compliance. You can attack major muscle groups to stop function, and you can also crush and break bones if it comes down to it. So I prefer a blunt weapon to a knife simply because it gives you more more possibilities of what you can do. Now, everybody wants to know from hearing this story what happened with the biker out there. He got this was the best knife defense I've ever seen. Well, first off, when I was out there with him, he sliced past me and I went in and I checked him off. Well, you know, I'm not from the hood like Casey is, and I didn't grow up, you know, having to fight my way out of things. So I was trained, but when I jumped in and checked him off, I didn't hit him. I didn't take him out. That was my shot where I should have taken him out. I was real young, a young black belt at the time. And I thought, oh my God. So I pushed this guy away and he was slicing at me. He's coming at my face. I was leaning back. He's coming at my stomach. And I was howling out. So I created enough distance to get away from him. And about this time, this guy comes out of the bar and he had a keg service on the east side, which is kind of the rougher side of town. And he looks at the guy and he goes, F him and his knife. And he walks out with a CO2 fire extinguisher and steps up to the guy and just goes, whoosh, and envelops this guy in a cloud of CO2. And the guy's like coughing and sputtering. And the cloud starts to dissipate. And the guy starts to come at him again. And he just, whoo, hits him up again with this cloud of CO2. And about that time, you could hear the sirens coming. The cops had already been called. So when the CO2 dissipated, you know, he turned and ran and left the place, you know, but that was the best knife defense I've ever personally witnessed.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I will share something recently. The most precious asset is, besides your own life, are those that you love. And if somebody does something to you to take your life, that means your loved ones will be denied you as well. I was in Long Beach in August and I had my little guy, 7-year-old. We went to the tournament and we got done and we went afterward to have pizza. Next door was a yogurt shop. We went in to get the yogurt because Georgie wanted it. 2 homeless guys out in the front decide to get in it. The one guy looks like he could be Red Fox's brother without the beard. Has a knife on his hip, pulls it out. We're inside the yogurt shop. We're looking through the glass. Immediately, I said, you know, what do? I went over to the door. Which way does that door open? It opens in. Put a foot against the door, told call 911, which the son of a bitches never showed up down there, so they didn't care. And these are guys are going at it. My thing was to protect that little boy and my friend that was with me. And I didn't have to go outside that door to prove some karate crap, okay? I used the thinking process, which Chuck Sullivan would have said, run. Brian says, leave. Yeah, everybody here has said, Casey said the same thing. My brother was engaged as LAPD officer twice in 2 shootings. Sadly, he had to kill both of them. It lives with him the rest of his life. He said, but he was doing it his duty. And the one guy it was pretty scary. The guy was coming at him. They tried to hold him back. He wouldn't stop. Came him, they had to take him down. And that's how it goes. So we have to worry about liability. That's the number one thing. Is it worth us to go to jail? Because you're going to go to jail. You're going to get arrested. You're going to go to jail. You're going to have to get an attorney. And then it's in a court of law. So if you can avoid those kind of things, that's a smart. So that brings me to my next question, which is the second part of our Kenpo. We have the physical, which we've spoken about. Each of us has a position on that. Now the intellectual side. Let's talk about that. The thinking man. So I'm going to throw Todd and Joe Rebelo into this mix right now. What is the importance of the intellectual side, the thinking man side of our Kenpo? And I'll start with you, Joe.
It's like a parachute, works best when it's open. You know, the intellectual elements of what we do in our martial arts is what saves our lives. If we don't have a brain to work with, you know, a person can have the best body in the world, but if their brain isn't working, you know, if they can't think logically, like we talked about the weapons and whatnot. I'm a survivor of all that. I've been stabbed. I've been slashed. I got a 16-stitch side on the side of my neck, so I slit my throat with a straight razor. I've been shot at. I've been shot. As experiences go, they all sucked. but having the conscious intelligence of mind to be able to not let this overwhelm me, to mentally go, boom, parry it off and look around and go, you know what? I get hit harder in class. And I'm going to survive this. And I'm going to survive this experience. And having the thought of mind, Frank Trey always tells my story as what not to do in a fight. He loves that. He used to love to tell the story about what happened to me because I did everything wrong, but I still survived. And it's having that mental capacity of understanding. That's what I loved about Ed Parker, was the fact he was a thinking man. In my opinion, he was the greatest one of the greatest martial minds of the 20th century. He taught us how to think. You know, I asked Mr. Parker one day, Mr. Parker, if you could do anything with a martial arts school, what would you do? He said, Joseph, I'd take one wall, I'd paint it white, and then in 10-foot letters, big black letters, I would paint one word: think. Think about what you do. Think about how you move. Think about how to defend yourself against various scenarios. And that's what we've talked about all night. We've talked about how we, as thinkers, and the other phrase from him I'll never forget, Joseph, make sure you are a thinker so you are not thumped upon.
Todd, help us. Where are we lacking in the educational side of our Kenpo now? How can we improve that?
If I give a person a shovel and they have never used a shovel, they will only be able to use it in some limited capacity. But if I teach them how that shovel works properly, using levers and leverage, and how it digs and how it does other things, and show them how to use it as a weapon, and show them all of the cool attributes that simple shovel has, then they're going to be better equipped to take that out into the world and use it to either make money, make enemies, make friends, make people go away, all of those things. So without that the intellectual properties that are bound to that shovel, the ideas and the concepts and the principles that help that be a functional tool, it's really mostly worthless to the person that doesn't know how to use it. And that's the same thing with the martial arts. You see a lot of people, they punch kick, they understand punch kick, harder, faster, that's what they're trying to do. And only when they spend the time to understand how that punch and or kick can be more efficient, more effective, more powerful, then do they start to grow and develop into somebody that's a true martial artist.
This open question to anyone. You can jump in on this. Now, remember, the Mr. Parker had a wonderful thought, and I've used this in my quotes sometimes. I wrote about it in my for Kenpo Karate, and I want to repeat it, kind of verbatim as I wrote it, because I think it's important, and then you guys can comment on it. I said, Mr. Parker wanted us to be thinking martial artists. His open learning policy is based upon simple logical conclusion from our legal system, better known as point of view. My response is simple. Truth, whose point of view? Is it left, is it right, or is it somewhere in the middle? Okay, depends on who's the judge, who's the jury, and whose truth is permitted. You know, if you think about it, continue to seek this knowledge, and looking past your own point of view, you will see that the journey is there and that there'll be wisdom to be gained from it. So what we're doing is we're lacking. It's been 6 generations since Ed Parker died in 1990. That's every 5 years. Okay, so we got 30 years. That means there's 6 generations of black belts. Are we conveying collectively, guys? Are we helping them to put together not only the physical side, but the thinking side, the knowledge side, thus gaining the wisdom to make the right decisions? And if not, what do we need to do to improve that part? And I'll leave that open. Whoever wants to jump in, go ahead first. Go ahead, Larry.
You know what? It really resonated with me when everybody started to say think, right? I mean, because that's kind of a principle that goes forever. I mean, remember when I was a little league baseball player, my dad wrote think on my baseball book, right? Just to think about what's going to be the next play. What are you thinking about? And even with my company, You know, we talk a lot about that. It's like, you know, you got to think, and not only think, you got to think differently. But what Mr. Parker left us was these great principles that are just outstanding. And I have tested them through many other things that I've done. You know, whether it's boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, MMA, you name it, the principles of Kenpo stand up. And that's where we need to rely on. But what we tend to do is we go back to, we're just going to teach somebody a technique, but we're really not telling them why we're doing it, what it means. And the best way to teach that technique is to start with just a simple move and then kind of generate, you know, moves after that, instead of just saying, okay, we're going to teach you, you know, thundering hammers or 5 swords or something like that, which is, it's almost like teaching somebody a dance move, but they don't know what they're trying to accomplish and what the principles are behind that. And to me, that's a very important thing to me. And that's what I work on with my guys all the time. It's all about principles. And I've got people that come in that are wrestlers, that are, you know, boxers, that are ex-Kenpo people, or some people that have started with Kenpo. And they like it when you teach it to them that way. Instead of teaching them the movement from the very beginning, we start with the why. You know, why are we doing this? And that's kind of what, when you said that, I was like, yeah, that's what I've been trying to do the last 10 years, is really just try to focus more on that and less on memorizing a combination, because it's no different in boxing. If you go back to boxing, and there's a lot of people started in boxing. You go back to boxing, it's like anybody can learn a boxing, you know, combination, but there's a strategy behind that. It's not just, you know, do this, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever. There's more to it than that. So that's kind of where I come from on that.
Okay, let's move. Anybody else have any comments on that? Jump in.
Yeah, I'd
Go
like
ahead,
to jump
Dave.
in on that. I like what Larry was saying on that too, you know, and what I'm seeing too, you know, we have to think, but the biggest thing is when we think, we're going at it, and just an opinion, going at it very scientific on it, versus getting them interested in it and getting them away from the script. It's like going into McDonald's and saying, hey, can I help you? They know what they're going to give you. And if you get them off course from that script, they don't know how to act. And I think we've turned our art a lot of times into a memorization, like you were stating. And I believe that to be true. I like the idea of keeping them interested in it. And I think we need to get more involved in teaching them the rules and principles of the motion. But as you stated, get them to apply it. Because without applying it, it's like Alan Dershowitz said, you know, during the day, you feel that beautiful warm breeze, but at the end of it, it's just hot air. So we need to give it a meaning and give it some depth to it. So they're interested in it. They like it. They want it. They can't get enough of it. And that's up to us as being the guide on bringing them into the fold.
Yeah, one of the things, and I agree with Marty, you know, one of the things I think that has happened in martial arts period, whether it's not just Kenpo, but in a lot of different systems, is we have created it where it's a memorization. For them to think, or for them to become thinkers, we have to pressure test it, right? We have to actually make it so that they're out of the comfort zone, and most importantly, that their adrenaline is pumping. Because when it comes down to a street confrontation, comes down to something where life and limb are in, you know, are in peril, that kind of a thing, your adrenaline's pumping. And it's a known fact that when your adrenaline starts to pump, you lose fine motor skill, you get tunnel vision, you go back to a baser instinct, okay? And those components are really missing from a lot of today's training. One of the things that I like to do with my group is run scenarios and types of training where it puts my students outside of that comfort zone. In the beginning, in the ideal phase, when we start to teach a technique, they don't stay there very long, because what I really want to see is how much they've digested from that technique and how we pressure test it. And now, are they thinking when the adrenaline starts to pump? Do they actually really know how to internalize that fear, that apprehension, and think through that? And that's one of the things that I find that is, as a martial artist, is something that we need to really help folks coming after us achieve. Because like a lot of the guys here, they're either in law enforcement or they've had some sort of bouncing experience. Myself, because of my profession and being a bouncer and the whole thing, I've dealt with that. But think about it this way, that person that walks into your studio, they may have never had a fight. They might be there for the same reasons like I was. I was a mild-mannered kid, and now we have to put them into a position where, yes, we're teaching them the way, but we also need to actually pressure test that. So now when they're in there in the ring, or they're in that situation, that they're able to overcome the fear, the adrenaline, get back to where they know principles and concepts and apply them to what's needed. So
I'm going to interrupt you there for a second, Dave. I get it. You're talking about the physical aspect. I get it. Showing them, just, don't do technique and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I get it. And then you start to change it around. What I'm looking at is more about the intellectual side of, what about classroom time? What about terminology? What about cross-referencing on techniques, how they're the same, maybe key master moves? Joe Rebelo does this a lot, cross-referencing techniques that do similar motion, okay? Well, Todd does that with sequence rescripting with his techniques. He'll talk about delayed sorting. He shows 2 applications that it looks like the exact same movement. On the other hand, go to Brian Duffy, and he shows you the relationship of the web of knowledge and how the first 7 techniques roughly, and why they're there and how they go across the board. There's a lot there. So I think we need to explore that more, guys. But that's just me. In all this time I've been here, listening to you tonight, but listening to almost 200 interviews, I learn something every time I engage with anybody here. I know one thing: if I'm with a Chuck Sullivan student or a Dave Prosser student, we're going to jump in and kick your ass right off the bat. We're not going to negotiate. It's over with, because we got to do, we leave. And that's a smart thing, right? If a knife comes up, Marty says, hey, I've worked with them. And you know what, Paul? Leave. I get it. All right. I'm not a law enforcement agent like KC. So I'm not carrying a gun, but I guarantee he's not going to put himself in a position where he may lose his life and deny his wife the rest of his life with her. He's going to make sure of it. Okay. So now let's get into this. Do we need to explore more of the intellectual side of the arts? Todd, Joseph, Brian, because you guys, that's your strengths. I know that, because I know your background. So please, between you 3, give me something.
I think the most important thing, the thing I hear a lot of times, and even from old style, the earlier they trained with Ed Parker, I would hear this. Paralysis of analysis, right? That people are so busy caught up in learning the theories and principles that they kind of lose the physicality of the art. And I always feel there has to be a happy medium. What I love about you, Paul, is when you pull out Mr. Parker's books. I mean, one of Mr. Parker's greatest inspiration when you asked him was Jesus Christ, because he was a Christian, the way he was. And he was like, and guess what? Not many, as the longer Mr. Parker's been gone, the less people I talk to who don't even know the books exist. Now, mind you, not only that was his opus, that was his, and told me himself, he was like, that was his opus. That was his masterpiece. And I know whole generations of Ed Parker black belts never seen any of those books. Were never told by their own instructor that those books even exist. For lack of a better term, that became Ed Parker's books of the Bible. He wanted people to learn what he had taught about and what he had experienced. And sadly, I see more and more people, actually less and less people, who actually know that those books even exist. They don't know about it. You mention about the theories and concepts, and they look at you like a deer in the headlights going, huh? Oh, I've never heard of that. Oh, my instructor never taught me that. Oh, we don't sell those at our studio. I saw it once online. I don't know what it's about. You know what? In my humble opinion, IMHO, that's terrifying. That's just out and out frightening.
Well,
that man's
like
legacy is not
it's
known
like
by
any
the
other
future
textbook, though. You can learn. There's been some great books You know, Lee had thousands of books on all aspects of combat, martial arts, philosophy, etc., etc. Mr. Parker, the brilliance of this guy was that he could have a conversation with any person on any level relating to a commonality of the say philosophy, because his background. He spent time with Bruce Lee. He spent time with, I remember I was interviewing Benny Urquidez, and Benny, he sat down with Benny and he worked with him before Benny went out. He did the same thing with Bob Mitchell. He knew how to identify and see a fighter. And he would say, okay, if you do this and this, stay focused on that. He would also be open to input from the students. Thus, Brian Duffy's input of how the restructuring of the entire system was put together. Okay, so we're not going to limit ourselves. I mean, there's an evolution. I think the most important thing is that we're sitting here as a group. Those that are watching this discussion, I suggest you reach out to any of these guys. Talk to Steve, talk to Dave, Brian, Marty, Casey, Joe, Todd, Dave Prosser, Larry. That is what this is for. This is to inspire you and maybe pique your interest into see, gosh, I better, you know, maybe I need to pick up Infinite Insights Volume 1. Look at this thing. This has been around since '82. This thing is falling apart. It's dog-eared, written, scripted. Why? Because for me, I refer to it all the time. I look at the 8 considerations. I look at the analytical study of motion, the web of knowledge. I look at the universal pattern. I discuss this on a regular basis with Todd Durgan. He has taken that apart and evaluated and expanded on. And I'm hopeful that all of us will just take a little bit of this. We're sharing the pie. And if you don't like it, it doesn't mean you got to keep it, but maybe it might help you a little bit. And remember, the early days of Ed Parker's system was because he came from the streets of Hawaii as a fighter. Joe will tell you. What was his background, Joseph? Boxing.
Well, originally boxing.
And
Way
then
back when.
and then
His dad
judo.
the dad was a middleweight contender and ended up being the boxing commissioner for Hawaii for 35 years. So the first art little Edmund ever learned was the sweet science of the gentlemanly art of self-defense.
And that's
Yeah,
it.
and then-
And then he worked with the other Hawaiians there, the Imperados, the Chows, the Rosaki, you name it. They all came from, those guys like to do 2 things. And if you've been to Hawaii, you know what I'm talking about, right, Brian? They'll live to eat and they'll kick ass. That's about it. Okay. Oh, they like to sing too. Forget that. I mean, you know, but the point is, we have more in common here than we have in difference. It's just a matter of point of view. What is important to you? What your teacher is sharing with you? My goal with the Hall of Fame Zoom meeting is to drive students to you, Dave Prosser, Marty, Zaninovich, Todd Durgan, etc. You guys, to drive them there to ask you those questions. How can I be a better martial artist? And I know you guys are going to share with them because you're still on that journey. So I'm going to end this right now with just final thoughts. It's getting late on the East Coast and whatnot. So Steve, what are your final thoughts before we go?
So from an intellectual point of view, because this really overarches everything else that we do, it's about goal setting. What is your goal and what are you willing to do to go get it? Because primarily what we're doing is self-defense, but what's the goal behind that, right? That teaches to what's the goal of why we teach this movement? How does that evolve over time as your experience grows? And it's still, no matter how far you get, it's still, what is your goal and how far do you want to go with it? What are you willing to do to go get it?
Your counterpart, Dave, what are your thoughts? Your final thoughts? Give me something quick.
The martial arts is such a multi-layered thing that it serves so many great things, and for somebody to get involved with it and just be diligent in your training and always have, to Joe Rebelo's point of view, an open mind to accept new concepts and thoughts and processes and just keep moving forward.
And Brian Duffy.
Well, Yeah, first off, I want to thank you for including me in this. It's been very enlightening and been great listening to all these guys. These are some great martial artists from all around the country here.
We're glad you're here too, Ryan. You have so much to offer. You're
Well,
very
thank you.
humble.
But you know, Mr. Parker left us a great curriculum, and in it is found a lot of the answers. But you have to dig. You can't just look at the surface of what's going on. You can't just take an ideal technique, look at it, and say, okay, this is how we do this. You have to compare the techniques to each other. You have to see why did he change this move? What is the difference here? And it's something that I keep telling my guys is that, you know, when you look at techniques, you have to see basically what we're taking is what the opponent is offering us. What is the guy giving us? And what does this technique teach us about what the guy's giving us or what we have available? So it has to be like Joe said, thinking man's art. You have to think about what's going on as you're studying the art, because none of us is going to do delayed sword or 5 swords out in the street. You know, you're going to react to the attack coming in, and you're going to use the principles and concepts that you've developed to be effective in that situation. You know, so you have to take those of us who do the Ed Parker system, you know, have to take these techniques and you have to dissect them and look at them. There's more than just a single answer to what's going on, but more about, you know, what does this technique teach us in terms of what we're able to do and what our opponent is giving us at that point in time, and compare the different techniques. It's a great art, and something, you know, it's something that can keep us all busy for a long time. Let's put it that way.
Well, you've already started that. I can tell. Look at what you structured the system, and it really makes it very interesting and much more consumable. I always attribute the original system of 32 like going to a gigantic buffet, and you've helped me understand where everything's laid out so that we can understand it. May not enjoy it, but we'll at least be able to taste a little bit. Mr. Prosser, I'm so excited you could be on here tonight, Dave.
Thank you.
It's so good
I
to see you.
appreciate it. It's great to be here with all these great guys that I'm with right now. And it just shows me that people like us, we all have this common factor of Kenpo's going to go strong. I think a lot of the issue is social media nowadays and that kind of stuff. I think Kenpo is going strong. I think it'll always go strong. And remember, Kenpo evolves. Mr. Parker wanted that. He wanted us to build off what he had. So I just think that it's going in the right direction. There might be a few out there that, you know, we could say things about, but, you know, I think in general, people like the group of us, we're going to carry it on, and Kenpo is going to be strong, you know, for a long time.
Thank you. And please give our very best to Mr. Hebler. I know that he's
I will.
going to come up. Let's go on down a little bit further on here. Marty Z.
Well, I like everything that Mr. Duffy was saying and everybody's been saying tonight. You know, I'd like to read something if I could.
Sure.
And it's from Brian Enos. Brian Enos is probably one of the world's top-notch gun shooters, and he had a lot of the same philosophies as Bruce Lee and a martial arts kind of foundation. He said the truth of cause and effect, which would be like our techniques, it's going to give you a truth and it's going to give you an effect from it, is that there's a whole lot of gray area. And I think that gray area goes in and relating to what Mr. Duffy was saying. So you start studying the motion and start learning position recognition and start learning where to go without thinking. And it further stated, it says the truth beyond the techniques, the application beyond the analysis, the means beyond the methods. Here's where we stop thinking and start flowing. And I think we forget to flow. You take what comes and you deal with it and you start returning it back to them with an impact of a lot more energy coming back at them. And that's through what we're talking, study, like Dave was saying, pressure test. You gotta put it to the test or it's not gonna happen for you. You'll sink to the level of your training under pressure. Train well.
Let's move on and talk to Casey Jones. Casey.
Yeah, just a culmination of everyone. It's just accepting, improvise, adapt, and overcome. Those are the principles that we're discussing right now. Fix it so it works for you at the time. There's nothing that can't do, just maintaining mind control, as we discussed before. Thank you,
Thank you very much. Casey, I always love hearing you.
sir.
Yeah. You smile more often, buddy.
Hey, one love, man. One love.
Please
Oh, no,
give
I
our
have-
very best to Mr. Muhammad.
Quick question though, David G, I'm sorry. What do I have to do to send some dry ice down there to get some lobster or something, man?
I am me. We'll work something out, sir.
Beautiful. See, and this is good. We can exchange information,
I'm
including
loving it.
food. What a great idea. Nourishment, very important. That'll be what part of before the conditioning aspect. Let's
Well,
get.
no,
I'll take some
Jerry
tuna
Wilson.
if you can do tuna.
We want to say thank you very much for being a part of tonight's panel. It really is important, and your insightfulness with your information. Let's go over to Todd. Todd Durgan, your final thoughts.
Yeah, so I think just to kind of touch on the analytical study, all of that, you have to have a willingness to do it. You have to have a willingness to learn. You need to make sure that you're studying concepts and principles is what's the word, augmented by your actualization or application of those concepts and principles, i.e. what everybody else has been saying, turn up the pressure, make sure you can do it under pressure, because things are going to be a lot different when the S hits the fan. So otherwise, pleasure and an honor to be with these gentlemen. Thank you all very much for your input and insight.
I think I will finish it out with this final thoughts. I always like to quote sources of reference, because then these things have been tried and true. Obviously, all warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu, great treatises. It's used all the time. Go back and look at it a little bit sometime, folks. Another one is the great Lao Tzu, what he says about common sense. When wisdom and intelligence are born, the great pretense begins. In other words, you need to be able to make those decisions. Finally, last but not least, I'm going to talk and say something about Mr. Parker at the Zen of Kenpo. The man who knows how will always be a student, but the man who knows why will continue to be the instructor. Tonight, I am learning from you fine gentlemen. It is truly an honor, and I wish you the very best in all your endeavors. I hope that we can continue to do this, get together, share our thoughts, how we can improve the art. Remember, no one's bigger than the art. Even Ed Parker would say that. And so us collectively are doing great things for our community. Hopefully we'll bring more of us together. And I think we have common ground. With no further ado, gentlemen, thank you so very much. My name is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame. This has been a celebration of greatness in the educational video series. And thank you, all of you. Salute.